Sorry, sound people. That's a beautiful song. Thank you, Christine. It was beautiful. And thank you, everyone else, for everything you're doing here to really create an atmosphere. In a sense, we are indeed together again. And the theme, of course, is in reality, because after the pandemic, here we are together again. But the idea, too, is that we'll be together again in heaven. And so when we take a look at the Old Testament, we see that Moses led his children to the, quote, promised land, which is, in a sense, a metaphor for us because we're going to the promised land. And so I'm going to read to you a scripture right now. I'm going to read to you the same scripture in a paraphrase at the end of my message. And in between, I'm going to tell you a long story about the financial crisis and the spiritual lessons that we learn. And right after I read the scripture and enter into the slide which gives the title, that's when I'm going to pray. Moses says, from Deuteronomy 4, "See, I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do thus in the land where you are entering to possess it." So they're on their way to the promised land. So keep and do them, the statutes and judgments, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of all peoples, which are the outsiders, who will hear all these statutes and say. So this is the outsiders looking in. "Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God whenever we call on him? Or what great nation is there that has statutes and judgments as righteous as this whole law, which I am setting before you today?" So here Moses recognizes that he's been called to lead a people who will be called God's people. And God's people, he set them up to be a light to the whole world. Now, it didn't work out that way all the time, but that was the goal. And now we as a church have been called to do the same job, to be a light to the whole world, so when people look on, they say, "Wow, you guys are so cool. Can I be a part of you?" And it goes on like that. So last night, we talked about how to be perfect without trying, and I may have challenged some people, I don't know, but love does make a difference. And tonight, it's going to be lessons from the financial crash, spiritual lessons, and tomorrow morning, two Christianities, and it's basically our response to skeptics when they take a look at Christianity and they say, if that's what Christianity is like, I want no part of it. And so we're going to be responding to that as we go. But right now, spiritual lessons from the financial crash as we attempt to answer some other types of questions to do with what we're going to call theodicy. Before I do that, let's pray, shall we? Our Father in heaven, Lord, again we come to you in prayer, asking you, dear Lord, to start a running conversation with us in our minds and in our hearts. Lord, help this next 50 minutes or so to be a time when we have a conversation with you and we hear your voice and you are listening to our hearts. Because, dear Lord, I'm guessing there are people who right now are struggling with their faith and they need help. And so, Lord, I pray that you help them. Be real to them. Lord, use me today, make me nothing and you everything as we share a little bit and we talk about you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, how's everybody doing so far? Are you well? I hear some people aren't so well. I'm going to pray for them. But you know what? In the end, it doesn't matter because in the end, we're all going to be together again and we're going to be in heaven, right? That's what we want to be able to do. My title for this is Spiritual Lessons from the Financial Crash. And I'm going to go through a story that's going to take longer than normal. Not the sermon, but the story part. And in the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, I'm going to talk about what we normally talk about as Seventh-day Adventists. But this is a bit of a new approach to try to figure out the answer to a particular question that comes up all too often when we're engaging the world with God talk. It began with a desire to reach Vancouver. A number of us pastors in the Vancouver area, 10 years ago or so, realized that Vancouver was perhaps the most secular, irreligious, postmodern city in all of North America. And we wanted to see what we could do to reach secular, postmodern, irreligious people, but yet who were still seeking for something. And so when I met with the pastors, I was the ministerial director at the time, I had just read the text in James chapter 1 and verse 19. It says, "Be quick to listen and slow to speak." And so I wanted to be sure that before I spoke to a group of people who were seekers but yet skeptics, that I had listened first, so that I could, scratch where it itches type of thing. So I asked the pastors, I said, do you mind asking your church members? Another question came in, says, why does it have to hurt so much? Another question that came in said, God, if you knew there would be so much pain in the world, why did you let Satan do his thing? And then I began to see a pattern in these questions. We had about 60 of them or so that came in. Basically, most of the questions that came in were a modified version of the one that you now see on the screen. God, if God loves us so much, God, if you love us so much, why do you allow people to suffer? Now, that used to be one of the questions that was a hindrance, an objection to Christianity. It wasn't the first question over the years. Some of the first questions were Christianity doesn't agree with science, or Christians are hypocrites, or I had a bad experience in church when I was young, and this one too. But in the last 10 years or so, this has been the number one question, especially for people under 40. Our millennials and our Gen Ys and Gen Zs, etc. If there's so much suffering in this world, and they can't help but see it on the news, and perhaps in their own family, then how could a good God allow that? And that is a big question. And so having understood now the heart of the people that we were trying to reach, and at least they're open. I mean, they're open to ask that question and come to hear an answer. Then that kind of helped me to formulate an answer. Now, we as Seventh-day Adventists, and if you're not a Seventh-day Adventist, hey, welcome here. Glad you're here today. But we as Seventh-day Adventists have an answer to this question, and it's all about what the devil does. And don't blame God, it's the devil. And that's true. It's very true. But I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a summary of 1,000 books on the subject, what most books will say in answer to this question. And then I'm going to give a little bit more. Number one, God is love. Number two, love allows choice. Number three, choice allows sin. And number four, sin brings suffering. Now, if I could summarize 1,000 books, that's mostly what they kind of say if I could oversimplify the answer. And it's a good answer. It's a good answer. Like, how is suffering consistent with a loving God? And that's a good progression. God is love, love allows choice, choice allows for sin, and sin brings suffering. So that's a good answer. And then we could say, therefore, a loving God can allow suffering because he allows choice. And I think a lot of you kind of know this, and you kind of have an understanding. Maybe you haven't had it presented to you in such a concise form, but I like to take a lot of things and put into a small, quick form, as small as I can. But now I'm going to add a few more. Why suffering? Number one, we suffer because we reap what we sow. Now, it doesn't answer all the suffering, but it answers some of it. Financially speaking, if we make a stupid decision 20 years ago to buy a house we couldn't afford or a yacht that we went into debt for, then often we suffer the consequences of a financial decision in the past. Or a relational hurt If we get angry and we hurt somebody, then there's a separation in that relationship, and then we have to make up for it, and there's emotional suffering as a result. Or maybe it's health, physical suffering. If we make a bad decision to eat, cheeseburgers every day and have sugar, salt, and fat, and white flour and everything else, and we do that for 50 years, then most likely we'll suffer in some way. So we reap what we sow. And so it's just a consequence. So that's one reason for suffering. We reap what we sow. Another reason is that God is training you. In other words, if you happen to be, the analogy would be if you are a member of a team, a hockey team, a football team, a soccer team, basketball team, and the coach, your coach, is working you hard, and it feels like suffering. He's making you run laps. He's making you do extra push-ups, do more baskets, whatever it is. It feels like suffering. But the reason why he's pushing you hard is because he's training you for a big game coming up. So there's this long-term consideration that we have to take into account for suffering in some cases. God is training you for something coming up. A third one is that God is showing you off. Have you heard of that one before? Job. We know that many of us know the story of Job. Job had no idea. He had no idea that God and Satan were talking about him. And God says, "Hey, have you considered my servant Job? I'm really proud of him." And then the discussion that they had, and Satan says, "Listen, he's just serving you because you're giving him all kinds of goodies and stuff like that." So they had a big deal. They had an agreement. Okay, go ahead and do what you want to do, says God, except just don't touch his body, etc. And so Job went through the suffering because God was proud of him. He went through the suffering because God loved him and wanted to show him off and help him to be a witness to other people. And so sometimes you're suffering and I'm suffering, not because of anything bad you did, but because of something good you did. God wants to use you to be a witness to other people, to see how strong you are in the face of all that bad stuff happening in your life. And your neighbors are looking at you and say, how do you do it? How do you do it? And you say, "You know what? I don't do it. It's my Lord that does it for me." It's a witness. So God sometimes allows us to suffer so he can show us off. And then the fourth one is God is waiting to finish the job right. Now, I had a Bible class a number of years ago, and we were discussing this in Bible class, and this kind of came up because we knew that we couldn't answer all the reasons for suffering. Because innocent people suffer and they didn't, bring it on themselves, and sometimes we reap what someone else has sowed, etc., etc. So in the end, perhaps if I could illustrate what the class agreed on with this story. I was 10 years old. I came home from school and I saw my mother washing the mirror. It was a big, tall mirror. It started maybe 2 feet above the floor and went up really, really high, 6 feet high. It's a big, long, tall mirror. And she was washing from the bottom going up to the top. Now, I had just come home from school, and I said to my mother, "You missed a spot." How do you think my mother responded to that one? She turned her head right around, and she was not happy. She said, "I'm not finished yet." And I realized I should have not said anything and waited till she finished. Now, sometimes that's what God says to us. When we judge God, we say, "God, why? I don't get you, God. Why are you allowing this to happen?" God says, "Listen, I'm not finished yet. The story's not over. You just wait until the job is done, and then you can judge me." And that's sometimes we just have to allow that to happen. Okay, so those are kind of 4 very quick thoughts on why suffering. But there's a big but at the end of it all. What is God going to do about it now? In other words, now that sin is rampant and suffering is all over the place, what does love do without removing choice? Because love allows choice. So what does love do with sin and suffering without removing the choice of someone who's doing the sinning. What does love do? And that's when I saw this documentary about the financial crash. And I have to share it with you. This documentary, I'm sure it's over 10 years old, and it's from something, it's a PBS, public broadcasting system that comes out of the United States. And they had like a news type of a show called Frontline, The Warning. And, and in there, let me just see if I can read this properly. I'm going to read what I just blew up there. In the midst of the 1990s, so I'm going to do a little bit of a history here for you. In the midst of the 1990s bull market, that means when things are growing and people are making a lot of money. Right now we're entering to a bear market, but then it was a bull market. One loan regulator warned about derivatives dangers. We'll talk about what we mean by derivatives in a moment. And overnight became the enemy of some of the most powerful people in Washington. So there's a drama that's set up now with this one loan regulator, and her name is Brooksley Born. And Brooksley Born became my hero when I watched this documentary, and I've seen it 4 times or so. Brooksley Born, longtime securities lawyer, that's a financial thing, with a stellar reputation. Brooksley Born was appointed by President Bill Clinton in 1996 in an obscure office in the United States administration. It was called the Commodity Futures and Trading Commission, called CFTC. And Brooksley Born happened to have been appointed only 9 years after a very famous financial man named Alan Greenspan. Now, Alan Greenspan was appointed in 1987, just 9 years before, by President Ronald Reagan. And he made Alan Greenspan the most powerful banker in the world and the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So Alan Greenspan, interestingly enough, working with his entourage, believed in a free market capitalism. Now, a free market capitalism is a type of government, it's like the government allows the market to do what it wants to do. Now, I'm going to set up a drama here. For Alan Greenspan, the less regulation, the better. Allow all the companies, all the corporations to do whatever they want without any government regulation or government intrusion. And allow the market to regulate whatever the market wants to do. Meanwhile, Brooksley Born believed in government regulation. And so you can now see an eventual clash about to come. In 1996, when Brooksley Born was put in to the power, and it wasn't a whole lot of power, but yet it turned out to be. In 1997, everything was going fine until 1997 when Procter & Gamble sued Bankers Trust. Now, Procter & Gamble is a company you've probably heard of many times. You probably have about 10 or 20 products made from Procter & Gamble in your house. In your laundry room, your kitchen, your bedroom, wherever it is, they just make lots of stuff, soap and everything else. They're behind Tide and Bounce and Gillette and all that kind of stuff. So Procter & Gamble is a huge corporation, and they invested in Bankers Trust. And Bankers Trust betrayed their trust. And so that revealed to the world how bankers took advantage. Bankers took advantage of companies by selling complicated financial products that nobody could understand to Procter & Gamble. Bankers Trust basically said, trust me. However, they were caught on tape saying, we are taking advantage of them. And so they were sued. Now, when that lawsuit happened between Bankers Trust and Procter & Gamble, Brooksley Born was looking on, and she recognized, hey, there is no record keeping going on in this financial world. And that means that trillions and trillions of dollars are traded behind the doors, and it's all kept secret. There's no regulation going on. That concerned her a little bit. She said to a number of people, if something went wrong in the high-stakes derivative market, it could take down the entire system. Now, what is a derivative market? Well, I'll tell you. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you a little bit. Derivative is the word, it's a financial contract that is done between two companies where the value of what you purchase is derived from an asset which is connected but disconnected to what you purchase. It is complicated. And so the derivative market was driven by the real estate, the whole real estate deal all over North America. Now, what happened was when Brooks Libourne saw in the derivative market, in these purchases of financial products which were very complicated, and I don't pretend to understand it all, that because of what was going on, she could foresee that a big institution might not be able to pay its debts. And if you couldn't pay its debts, it would cause the next institution who needed that money to not get it. And that institution wouldn't be able to pay its debts, so it couldn't go to the next company that was down the line, the supply chain type of thing. And so what Brooks Libourne wanted to do was put a stop on the domino effect by government regulation. And so she could see a crisis coming. Meanwhile, she could see this crisis coming. Remember, she had a stellar reputation and she knew about financial markets. Meanwhile, Alan Greenspan was basically telling Congress and the U.S. economy is the best he's ever seen. Here's proof that market capitalism was invincible. And so just allow the markets, allow the companies to do what they wanted, and don't mess it up. Don't regulate it. Don't intrude. Government, stay out of the way. Just let the bull market run. Let everybody get rich, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what happens apparently in the United States government when someone wants to propose a new law, a new legislation, a new regulation, a new statute, that they would write a concept and kind of spread it around and say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. And so that's what Brooks Libourne did. And so she wrote a concept, and she said, when there are no regulations, the people will eventually suffer. Now remember how I began this message about world suffering. And remember that I said when I watched this documentary, it helped me with spiritual things. And so Brooks Libourne, I don't know whether she's a Christian or not. She sounds very Christian, but it's the concept that I'm getting at here, which is a perfect analogy. She said, when there's no regulations, the people will suffer. And so Robert Rubin hears about it. He's in the Treasury Department. And so he calls in his secretary, a man, Larry Summers, who eventually became the president of Harvard University, etc. And Rubin sends in Larry Summers to talk to Brooks Libourne. He says, Brooksley, stop what you're doing. Now, Larry Summers is called the bulldog. He gets angry, he gets loud, he pounds his fists on the table, and so he intimidated Brooks Libourne as best he could. He says, you are going to cause the worst crisis since the 1930s, since the Great Depression. And then Brooks Libourne, when she's later reflecting on this, she says, and 13 bankers called me up to tell me to stop this consideration of regulation. Just stop it right now. And so it came to kind of a showdown between Brooks Libourne, who wanted to regulate these huge derivatives markets and the companies and the trading that was going on behind closed doors, and Alan Greenspan and his entourage, who wanted to leave them alone. And so there would be a big confrontation, and it would be against what they called the President's Working Group. In other words, you had Robert Rubin, and you had, I want to put this in here. Robert Rubin, you had Alan Greenspan, and Larry Summers. You can see their titles right there. And so they became the big giants that little Brooks Libourne was up against. But remember, Brooks Libourne could see suffering coming, and she wanted to prevent the suffering from coming. And so the working group told Brooksley Born the deregulated market, in other words, the market with no laws, the deregulated market is what brought us to the boom times. So just leave it alone. Don't regulate it. Don't touch it at all. And Greenspan is just livid. He is angry at Brooksley Born for even bringing up the subject. You are going to ruin our economy. We got like 300 and some million people who are just thriving. So leave them alone. Let them get rich. And don't mess it all up. And Brooksley Born just doesn't see it that way. But 2 weeks later, Brooksley Born says, okay, I'm going to publish this. I'm going to go with this. And so she does. She publishes the release, and she talks about legislation that she's going to now intrude upon those many, many companies that want to trade derivatives behind closed doors. They call it OCT, over the counter. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Finally, because Ellen Greenspan and Robert Rubin and Larry Summers couldn't stop Brooksley Born, only Congress could stop her. And so they appealed to Congress of the United States, please stop Brooksley Born. She's going to ruin our economy. And so they took her to Congress. And so she is now attacked on Capitol Hill by senators, by congressmen, and they say, listen, there is no evidence to suggest concern. Now remember, Brooksley Born has been 20 years in the business, and she can see things other people can't seem to see. And they tell her there's no reason to suggest concern. And so she had to testify 4 times in 1998 before the Congress, and they were a hostile Congress at that time, the congressional committees that they had. Highly respected men came and testified against her, and some of those men were Nobel Prize winners in economy, etc., and they testified against Born. And eventually, here's Brooksley Born on television kind of answering some questions, and one of those questions was, what are you trying to protect? Like, who do you think you are? And her answer was this: we're trying to protect the money of the American public, which is at risk in these markets. That's what she's trying to protect. That word protection is a really good word, because she's operating from compassion for the people. And so they shut her down. They said, sorry, you're not convincing whatsoever. All you're doing is making a mess of the economy, and so let the economy run. It's doing just fine, so get out of the way. And so she did all she could to protect the public, and eventually, when she was asked to continue on, she said, I'm going to have to resign. I've done all I could. And so she did resign in 1998. Now, in 1999, it began a heyday of deregulation. And in 1999, the year 2000, you heard of the dot-com bubble that happened at that time. In 2001, it was a heyday of deregulation, the last 2 years of Clinton's administration. It was just privatize this, privatize that, just pull back government bureaucracy, just allow the companies, the business, the financial markets do whatever they want to do, because they've been bringing this country up so fast and making people rich. And so it was just wonderful. So the banks and Wall Street would regulate themselves. That's the concept. Now let me ask you a question. If you owned a cheese factory, would you ask mice to guard the cheese? That's what this is. When the banks and Wall Street have all this money available to them, and the government says, you just regulate yourselves. You just take care of it yourself. We trust you. Okay? That's what was happening. And so eventually, what happened was that the Committee to Save the World was announced on Time magazine in February of 1999. You can see the three, what are they called? The three marketeers. Now see if I can read this on Time magazine cover. I used to get Time magazine every week at this time. The inside story of how the three marketeers have prevented a global economic meltdown so far. That was in 1999. For those of you who were around in 1999, you might remember the dot-com bubble, et cetera, et cetera. Now, by 2007, I'm going to read it, then I'm going to explain it a little bit. OTC, derivatives market, grew to $595 trillion. Now, let me explain a little bit on that as best as I know how. First of all, OTC stands for over-the-counter. Over-the-counter is the opposite of regulation. Example, when you go to the drugstore, Shoppers Drug Mart, whatever, and you pick up some of your medications, you picked up the medications, it could be OTC, over-the-counter, which meant that you can just go and pick up what you need and pay for it. Now, otherwise, you go to a doctor, and the doctor writes you a prescription. The prescription that he writes to you is regulated. There are laws behind that. There are protections, and there are authority figures with credibility, i.e. doctors, who write those prescriptions. That's not OTC. That is prescribed. That's regulated. Now imagine going to your drugstore and saying, Mr. Pharmacist, I'd like to buy $10,000 worth of heroin, please. And the druggist says, yeah, just go down aisle 3, you pick up your heroin right there. Oh, thank you very much. Do you mind if I get some cocaine while I'm... Oh, yeah, just cocaine's right down there. Just pick that up. And then you plunk down your 2 bottles, your powder of cocaine, your powder of heroin, and the cashier says, yeah, that'll be $25,000, please. Thank you very much. Here's your money. That would be over the counter. But guess what? That'll never happen. Why? Because those drugs, when unregulated, will hurt you and they could kill you. So you don't do OTC with something that needs to be regulated to stop you from hurting yourself and to stop you from hurting other people. And so OTC derivatives now is that, but only in the financial market. It's over the counter. It's not regulated. Nobody's behind them, telling them what they can do, what they can't do, what they can buy, what they can trade, nothing like that. And so now that market expands and expands and expands to now it's over $500 quadrillion. I mean, never heard of that number before. And that's how big it is. Now, you can imagine then that if someone can't pay their debts, and this is all done behind closed doors, if somebody can't pay their debts, like Procter & Gamble or Lehman Brothers, whoever they were, all those people back then, and then it's the domino effect, and the economy has just crashed. And that's what happened. The Wall Street bet heavily on the real estate market at that time, which were all part of the derivatives market because they would bundle these real estate packages, and I don't understand it fully. But one thing depended on something else, which depended on something else, and was derived from something else, hence they're called derivatives. And so you can imagine now, with all the housing going on, the housing bubble kind of happened, and it was a ticking time bomb. It was just waiting for a big crash. It was like a housing bubble at that time, and not just housing, but so much more. So it was a big, big crash. And Brooksley could see it coming. Why? Because she could see how the derivatives market were just exploding, and there's nobody regulating it. The mice were guarding the cheese, and that's what she kind of saw. By 2008, and I remember in November and December of 2007, hearing about this on the news, and by 2008, it all collapsed. It just simply collapsed. The market collapsed. People couldn't pay their debts. They were leveraging themselves way, way, way too much, and they couldn't pay what they were supposedly supposed to pay. Interestingly, Alan Greenspan retired just before that. Interestingly, don't you think? Just before the crisis hit. So Alan Greenspan was called back to Congress to explain himself. You allowed this to happen? What's going on here? And so he says these words, the premise that the markets could regulate themselves was misplaced. Oh, really? Is that right, sir? Yeah, it was. I had a premise and it just didn't work out. Well, a lot of people lost a lot of money. over this. And you just say that premise was misplaced. Yes, it was misplaced. Now, then look what he said. I'm going to read to you word for word. I found a flaw in the model that I perceived as the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works, so to speak. I'm sure I speak for some of you when I say, huh? This is your famous Greenspan speak. So let me see if I can simplify it. Now I'm going to highlight in yellow the words that I want you to understand here. I found a flaw that defines how the world works. May I ask you a question? What do you think was that flaw? And how he thought the world works? What's the flaw? Some people will say, in greed we trust. The flaw is, and I'll just write it down on the screen, sinful human nature. When you put mice in charge of the cheese, you should simply expect that mice will do what mice do. They will eat the cheese. When you put greedy, powerful people over money and the potential to get more of it, you can just expect more greed to cause more suffering. Simple, sinful human nature. Now, Alan Greenspan called it a flaw. But we as Bible-believing Christians know it's not just a flaw. It's human nature. And God knows all about human nature. He knows all about that. And so, what are the lessons that we learn, and what are the lessons that I learned, and I want to share them with you. After having watched this documentary, I just encourage you to go and see it. It's called The Warning on Frontline PBS. I read this scripture. Now, this is the one that I read when I began. I'm not going to read it again, but I will read another paraphrase of it right here. This is Moses talking. I'm teaching you the rules and regulations. Remember, in the NASB, North American Standard Version, it says, I have taught you statutes and judgments. But when you look in the Hebrew and you translate that, that means rules and regulations that God commanded me, so that you may live by them in the land you are entering to take up ownership. Keep them, the rules and regulations. Practice them. You'll become wise and understanding. And when people hear and see what's going on, they'll say, what a great nation. So wise, so understanding. We've never seen anything like it. What caused the outsiders, the Gentiles, to look at the country of Israel and say, wow, you guys are so great. What did that? Their rules and regulations. How they regulated themselves. How God regulated them for their best success. Verse 7. Yes, what other great nation has gods that are intimate with them the way God, our God, is with us? Always ready to listen to us. See, that's our God, listening to us. And by the way, when I say God listens to us, some of you don't believe that maybe because you prayed and God didn't answer. That's why I passed out that handout called How to Hear the Voice of God, to give you a plethora of opportunities and ideas of what you can do to kind of like get God to show up in your life type of thing. If you don't have a copy, you want a copy, just email me or email Joanne at the conference office and we'll get you a copy. It's about 3,000 words for those of you who are just hearing about this for the first time. So yes, what other great nation has gods that are intimate with them the way God, our God, is with us, always ready to listen to us? And what other great nation has rules and regulations as good and fair as this revelation that I'm setting before you today? You see, it was regulations that did three things. Number one, it turned a group of slaves, the Hebrew people, into a great nation. What did that? Law, regulations. It also taught them how to act as an unbeatable team. In other words, it created unity. It created teamwork. It caused people to say, okay, I'll do this and you do that, and I won't do this and you do that. And it made for a team that was able to work together, and that team became, and theoretically, God's plan was they were to be the light of the world and spread that light to the whole world so everybody would join the Jewish nation, so everybody would become Jewish. That's kind of like the theory. It didn't work out that way. And so God called the church into existence. And God has called the Seventh-day Adventist Church into existence for such a time as this. And then the next thing is it reduced their suffering. You see, God not only gave moral laws, He gave ceremonial laws, He gave health laws, and He gave civil laws. And God gave those laws to help us get along, to help us stay healthy and strong, and to help us to be wise. He gave us those laws so we can have those wonderful benefits. And that's what the regulations were for. And the interesting thing is here, the word regulation is another word for law, like the law of God. It's a word for law. And it was given to answer the question of suffering. You see, God knew that if He allowed choice to happen on planet Earth, there would be suffering. He knew this. He could see it from the foundation of the world. And some people say, well, if God knew that, why do you let the devil do his thing? It's because God not only knew that, but He also knew what He'd be doing about it, and He also knew the end of the story. And so in the end, and I'll show it tomorrow evening, I'll show you something we're going to call the harmony of heaven, which is God's goal for the universe. And we'll share a little bit with that tomorrow evening. So God introduced law to minimize suffering in the world. Remember how it began, and I gave you 4 reasons for suffering. Sometimes we suffer because we reap what we sow. Sometimes we suffer because we make stupid decisions and we end up hurting ourselves. Well, if we could obey the law, then we wouldn't hurt ourselves so much. And this is one aspect of God's love to us, is by giving us these regulations. And if we trust God enough, it feels like we're suffering. It feels like we're being deprived. It feels like we're being restricted. But no, in the long run, we are being benefited. Our suffering will be reduced in the long run. Let me add to this. The suffering that would inevitably arise in a sin-filled environment. Okay, inevitably, we can just imagine. God inserted the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule, the Bible, so that there would be less suffering. Can you imagine if everybody obeyed the 10 Commandments, where this world would be at? Let's just say, thou shalt not steal. If nobody stole anything from now on, that would probably put all the locksmiths out of business. That would give us a lot more security. Thou shalt not kill, or in Hebrew, thou shalt not do murder. If that were obeyed in the world, do you think it would make the world a better place? Well, of course it would. A hugely better place. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Can you imagine the pain that would not happen if everybody abided by that particular law? And so you can see how this goes on. And so God knew this. He knows human nature. And so He gives the law for us to trust Him. That He knows better than us. He's our creator. We're His created beings. And so He knows. He knows better than us. And so He wants to save us from suffering. And so He gives us these laws, the Golden Rule, etc. These are called statutes and judgments in the Old Testament. And they are made to make the world a better place. A better place. And it's interesting, if you look up in Hebrew, statutes and judgments, I think it's the word statutes, it means prescription. Like a doctor's prescription for when you're in pain. And when we are in pain and when we're suffering in a number of different ways, it could be physical, financial, relational, mental, emotional, when we listen and obey God's laws is kind of like taking a prescription from Dr. Jesus, and it results in a just and in a safe world. Perhaps I could say it this way. When we receive the law of God in our hearts, we are receiving the love of God in our hearts. Because God did this for us, for our benefits. You see, the law would never be needed if people, especially powerful people, were compassionate. We've talked about that yesterday and the day before. If people were compassionate, like God is compassionate, then God wouldn't even need to make any laws. They're already obeying the law of God because they love everybody. They're not hurting anyone. Law is not needed for that. If powerful people were regulated, then it would stop them from hurting us. That's why God gave the law. But it goes more. There's more to it than that. If man obeyed God's law, there would be no suffering. I actually read that in the Spirit of Prophecy. But because of love, God will not force people to obey His law. That's kind of the problem, isn't it? God's not going to force you. And God's not going to force your neighbor, which means your neighbor could hurt you. Because God loves your neighbor and God loves you. But God does give a law. And He says, obey the law and it'll be for your own good, long-term benefit. Well, Brooks Lee Bourne tried to do that. She tried to provide a law that would protect people. And she wanted to regulate the powerful, the potentially hurtful, harmful people in the world. That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to put her hand down and stop the domino effect that would just hurt the rest of the world. That's what she wanted to do. Well, it turned out that Brooks Lee Bourne was right. And so, in 2009, right, just a year after the crash of 2008, I'm going to read this here. Brooks Lee Bourne was awarded the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award in recognition of the political courage she demonstrated in sounding early warnings about conditions that contributed to the global financial crisis. It was presented by Caroline Kennedy, daughter of JFK, and Brooks Lee Bourne recognized that the financial security of all Americans, is what she's saying, was being put at risk by sinful human nature. She says greed, negligence, opposition of powerful and well-connected interests, and the catastrophic financial events of recent months, she's saying this in 2009, have proved them, her and Sheila Blair, who also got the award, right. So Brooks Lee Bourne was proved right. Now, I happened to look her up, Brooks Lee Bourne, to see what she's saying these days. And she's saying, so long as there is continued deregulation, which there is, there will be continued risk. Now that made me think about Adventist eschatology. Eschatology is a study of last day events. And so now we're going to connect theodicy, which is a study of why suffering, with eschatology, the study of last day events. You see, giving a loving warning of the end in the face of experts saying things are okay is exactly what Brooks Lee Bourne was trying to do, and it kind of reminds me of what the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been called to do. To give a warning out of love and compassion. And the warning that we give has something to do with protecting people with the law of God. And I saw very quickly, as I watched that documentary, that Brooks Lee Bourne is kind of like a metaphor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And if you can kind of use your imagination that way. Number two, she saw something that others did not see. And God has given us a message. And He's shown us things from Scriptures that other people apparently cannot see. And so He's asked us to share it with the world. And he's called us together to act in unity, to act as a loving community, so that when the world sees that when we abide by those laws and regulations and how we treat each other and how we treat other people, that the world would say, I really like you. I want to be part of you. And you say, and we say, yes, please join us. Because we have a God who is so close to us. He hears us. He answers us. He protects us. He helps us. Join us because we are His creatures and He's our creator and you are too. See, this is evangelistic. Number 3, it was deregulation or lawlessness. Lawlessness is another word for sin, or the Greek word is anomia. A means without, nomia means sin, so law, and so without law. The state of being without law. In other words, lawlessness, or a deregulated state. It was deregulation or lawlessness that caused the crisis. I submit to you that deregulation or lawlessness will cause yet a future crisis in this world. And we know about it. We have the advantage of knowing the future. And so when we warn the world, we, however, have to be strategic and diplomatic because we just can't dump stuff on people thinking they're going to understand it. You've got to take it step by step. Number 4, Ellen Greenspan saw too late that there was a flaw in the system. The lawlessness allowed for greed to reign. Greed. And that's what's going to happen now and in the future of this world. There will be powerful forces. Interesting, the voice of prophecy thing there, like these dark, ominous, powerful forces trying to take us into where are they taking us? We kind of know the answer to that. And therefore, God, out of love, has given us the warning, the law, the Bible, a relationship with Him, and all the rules and regulations that kind of help us to get along so well that we could beat any team. Conclusion. Number 1, that selfish, powerful people cannot be expected to regulate themselves. Number 1. You don't put the mice in charge of the cheese factory. Number 2, that regulation is needed to reduce suffering. Number 3, because human nature rarely changes, we can expect a repeat of history. So, today, God wants to protect His people by regulating, by establishing a law, a moral law. Selflessness or love, however, can't be legislated. It can't be regulated. You just can't force people to love. You can't force the mice to give up their nature. You can't force this. This has to be done by supernatural power only with your choice and your knowledge. So we as Seventh-day Adventist Christians recognize Christ's sacrifice for us and ask Him into our hearts. This becomes a motivating power. Like last night, or was it the night before, we asked the question, since love is so powerful, how do we get the capacity, the power to love others? And we do it when we put ourselves in the environment where we perceive God's love to us. We love because He first loved us. And so that's why I gave that handout called How to Hear the Voice of God, so that you can put yourself in an environment, in a situation where you perceive God directing you and loving you and caring for you. And that sparks your love for Him and for other people. And that then creates a wonderful community. We all do that together. You put that together with the spiritual gifts and talents that God gave you, we become an unbeatable team for God. So this meaning the relationship with God and Christ in our hearts, this becomes a motivating power to protect us and others from our selfishness and greed. Because we can get selfish, we can get greedy, we can get proud, And that selfishness, that greed, that pride, that lust can hurt others. And so God wants to protect others from me. And God wants to protect me from you. And God wants to protect us all from each other and from ourselves. And that's why he gives us this law. And he says, on your own, you're not going to be able to keep the law. If you try on your own, you're going to be miserable. And you're going to make everybody else miserable too, as a legalist. So don't try. Just connect to me, and I'll give you the power to obey, to will, and to do of my good pleasure. That's what God said. But it's rather expensive to regulate people's behavior externally. It's expensive. You've got to put a lot of money and time to get people to do what you want them to do if they don't want to do it. So, isn't it just more efficient? I'm now thinking in terms of an administrator, I suppose, to have God's law written on people's hearts so that they're self-motivated to want to obey God's law, to please God because they love God, and they know nothing else but wanting to please God. It has to spring from within. We love because he first loved us. God commands me to obey the law to protect you, and he commands you to obey the law to protect me. And when we are protecting each other, we become that wonderful community that God's called us to. So when we all trust that God knows what's best for the world, we can say what we just read there in Deuteronomy. Isn't this the great God that has kind of given us these statutes and these laws, these regulations? And people will look at us and say, wow, you guys really know how to act like a team. It's kind of like a musical band or an orchestra. They really work well together. It's inspiring. Or it's like a sports team. They know how to pass the puck and score the goal. They do it so well. That's going to be the church. That's God's church, where they're, figuratively speaking, being able to pass the puck and share and get assists and get the goals. It's like everybody working together. It's because God lays out how to behave so we can do that. We're not saved by that. We're not saved by that. God says, listen, I've already saved you. Let's get to work. That's what God is saying. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8 says, listen, you're saved by God's grace through faith to do good works. So salvation is already done. So let's not fret over that, but let's just get to work so that we can please God and be a light to the world around us. Does that make sense? This is what God's law is all about, you see. And so part of that conclusion is that God is shown to be love in the end, and he does it through us. So we need a group of people who will be the Brooklyn-borns of this world, who will be able to educate themselves to know the signs of the times, to be able to apply the law, and to be able to do the law, but have the law come from inside their hearts, not trying to force it upon yourself or upon other people, but it comes out of a love relationship with God, which is the foundation of his government. So tomorrow night, we're going to talk about the harmony of heaven. And as I read the Spirit of Prophecy, God wants to reproduce the harmony of heaven in his church on earth. That's a lot of unity. We've got a lot of work to do. Not you guys, but where I'm from, we've got a lot of work to do on this. So will you answer his call? That's the call to action tonight. Could you please take something from what you heard tonight and say to God, what is it that you want me to do about this? Who do I need to forgive? Who do I need to get forgiveness from? Who do I need to be humble before? Who do I need to unite with? Because if we don't, then you know that Satan will win. But we have seen the end of the story, and we know that God will win, but we just want to be on the winning side, right? He gives us the choice. You don't have to. I mean, I don't have to, but God is inviting us to join him in his team, in his church, in his community. And as I'm going to share tomorrow, I don't want to get ahead of myself, But there's something powerful, very, very, very powerful, when you have people united as one. As a matter of fact, it's so powerful that the spirit of prophecy says where there is unity, there is divinity. And that's what we need to have in our church. And we will have it in the end. It's just a matter of, will we be a part of it? And so what I've done is that I was inspired by the documentary. I saw some analogies to me and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It answered several questions that people have about why is there suffering in the world. It probably doesn't answer all of them, I know. But it helps. It helps me. It helps others, I think. And so, and I'm serious about this. This is a very, very serious topic. But it's a topic that can produce peace and joy in your life. To recognize where God is at on this. It's also something that we can say to other people when they are disillusioned and they're coming to you. And they're saying, why? And you can share some of this with them. And in the end, you can say, listen, we can't answer all the questions on suffering, but we do know the story's not over. And when it's over, then you can judge God. But until then, let's trust God and see where that goes. Does that make sense? Let's pray. Let's pray, shall we? Our Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you that you have this message for us and that I watched that documentary so many years ago, 10 years ago maybe. And you just put these thoughts into my head and I want to share them with these people here today so that we can all be on one page regarding your love. The love allows choice. Choice allows for sin. And sin brings suffering, but you're doing something about it. So, dear Lord, come into our hearts. Motivate us, move us, melt our hearts, and cause us to see your love for us. And so that we can be blessed by you, so we can be a blessing to others in the name of Jesus. Amen. May God bless you.